Fellas, I thought we were going to start this show talking about a little March Madness. We are going to get to rankings. We are going to get to NFL Draft. But there is no other way than to jump right into Stefon Diggs being traded to the Houston Texans.
Blockbuster deal, kind of a snoozy Wednesday in April, early April, and all of a sudden, boom, Stefon Diggs, who's been tweeting some cryptic stuff and posting some cryptic stuff for years. Yeah, exactly, but finally comes to fruition. So as we check out our rotoworld.com player news, the fact of the matter is Stefon Diggs gets traded to the Texans. There's like a second-round pick. Do you have the exact details of the deals?
The exact deal is Stefon Diggs, along with a 2024 sixth and a 2025 fifth, goes to the Texans. The Texans send back just a 2025 second-round pick. Now, the Bills will carry over $31 million in dead money. All of this tells you they wanted nothing to do with Stefon Diggs.
They were like, we want out of the Stefon Diggs business, as you see here from NFL Network. Ian Rappaport, to be specific, it's a 2025 second-rounder going to Buffalo. That's Minnesota's pick. Bills are giving a fifth-rounder and a sixth this year, along with Stefon Diggs. They wanted out of the Stefon Diggs business in a desperate, desperate way here. And you sort of get it, by the way. Like, let's just talk about lots to break down, obviously, but just from Buffalo's point of view, they clearly felt that in addition to being perhaps an off-the-field distraction or a distraction in the locker room, maybe there's some rift going on there. Once Ken Dorsey was fired, from week 11 on, Stefon Diggs had 5 or fewer receptions in 5 of his last 7 games. Fewer than 75 receiving yards in all but one of his last games. He had 1 receiving touchdown in his final 7 games. Single-digit fantasy points, by the way, not that that matters to the Bills, but it does matter to us, in 5 of his last 7 games, is sort of another way to show like the production wasn't there. A 65% catch rate or fewer in 5 of his last 7 games. Just to put a fine note on it, as anyone who had Stefon Diggs down the stretch last year knows this, on a points per game basis, he was wide receiver 44, averaging just 10.3 points. He had just 10.3 points. So wide receiver 44 on points per game basis last year. He was not good down the stretch. Now, some of that, there were a couple of big plays that they missed. The touchdowns are a little bit fluky, only 1 in 7 games. Like, obviously, that bottoms it out there. You see it there on your screen again. Averaging just barely 10 points per game. 45 yards a game is what he was averaging, and under 5 receptions a game. Compare that with, when he had Ken Dorsey there. So clearly the production was down. They felt like at age 31, hey, just get out from this bad contract like it's an addition by subtraction. Now, what do you got, Jay?
Well, it's just to say, I think it gives a lot of context to what happened in the second half of the season, the fact that they've moved on from him and taken this insane cap hit, where you just watch the games and beyond the stats, he just didn't look the same.
No.
They were taking him out on key third downs against the Eagles with their season on the line. He just didn't seem to have the same burst or explosion. To your point about the off-field stuff, he is the embodiment of that Denny Carter thing about the wide receiver tweeting, the enemy speaks quietly and holds a knife or whatever.
Right.
Diggs has always been that way. It didn't seem like a happy marriage. So I think this makes a lot of sense. I think the big question now is that, was that just an aberration because of maybe some health stuff and off-the-field stuff, or is that the guy that he is going forward? I think the answer is probably somewhere in between.
Yeah, I mean, look, so massive implications fantasy-wise on both the Bills side of the ball and the Texans side of the ball. So we're going to talk about the Texans, and then we'll get to the Bills. But Connor, just from a tape standpoint, from the X's and O's, did you feel like Diggs had lost a step, or was it just like they just weren't on the same page and their offense changed?
I didn't think he looked like the same player while the offense changed. So do you wonder, did they see that and decided to go in a different direction of the offense, or is there something medically that we weren't privy to with Stefon Diggs? Is there something odd with the relationship with him and Josh Allen, because some of the things he tweets, and I know people are very sensitive to that, why do we care about what he tweets? Well, the team also ended up just trading him, and like we said, they are carrying over $31 million in dead money. So there was something bigger than football here, it appears.
Yeah.
But the football wasn't great. I want to be very clear with that. The football was not great. The chemistry that they've had, they missed on a couple deep balls. And Diggs is a guy that, as great as he is at his best when he is fed 1 million targets and is featured throughout this offense. And it's no surprise his play took a dive when the Bills became a more balanced offense under Joe Brady, which I didn't think they always were under Ken Dorsey.
For sure. But the positives are, let's talk about this now. Let's move over to the Texans side of the ball. Massive implications. Number one is, listen, C.J. Stroud was already going to be one of the top quarterbacks off the board after what we saw last year. Now his second year in the system, his second year in the NFL. But now that you've added Stefon Diggs to a wide receiver room that has Nico Collins, that has Tank Dell, that has Dalton Schultz, you got Noah Brown there as well. All of a sudden, expectations for C.J. Stroud are sky high. The other thing, it just all of a sudden it sort of just reminds you of remember C.J. Stroud at Ohio State where he had Olave and Garrett Wilson and JSN,
right.
And now all of a sudden he's got 3 studs again at wide receiver. Sky's the limit for C.J. Stroud.
I think so. As you go through the Texans, so clearly good for C.J. Stroud. I don't think this is that bad for Joe Mixon, just given that he's going to have a more spaced floor to operate, so to speak. I think more touchdown equity just in the offense. But I do think it hurts Nico Collins a little bit just because it's someone who cuts into his target share. I think it hurts Tank Dell a fair bit as well, just because now he is wide receiver 3. And I think it kind of hurts Stefon Diggs a bit because he's not a clear wide receiver 1 anymore. But I do think an underrated thing is that when you're in Buffalo, Josh Allen's passing numbers always fall off in the second half of the season because it just gets colder in Buffalo, and you get these random games where Mac Jones throws 3 times in the wind because it's just insane and the total is 30. But now Diggs goes into a dome, so I think that is a big win. You get him out of the AFC East as well. Doesn't have to play the Jets twice, probably easier defenses that he's going up against in the Jags, the Titans, and the Colts. So I think it's difficult to pass with Diggs. He might just be happier as well and might just play better and not have the weird second half of last season. So I don't think he changes that much, but I think Collins and Dell go down.
I think schematically, too, something here is that with Diggs, they always liked playing him inside, outside. In Houston, if his most advantageous spot is the slot, you can put him in the slot. Nico Collins is a great outside wide receiver. Tank Dell, considering his size, is a very good outside wide receiver. So this opens up the slot opportunity for Diggs, where, in my opinion, he looks his best at this stage of his career.
I think it's probably negligible. I think to your point, Stefon Diggs takes a step down in the sense that he's now got a lot more targets. He's got more target competition than he had in Buffalo. But on the other hand, he plays in a dome now. I think they're going to try to get him more easy touches. The point of the matter is I'm sure the Texans did their homework, and they understand that, look, you don't trade for C.J. Stroud, and I guess they didn't give up all that much, but they are taking on still a pretty big contract, right? You don't make that trade for Stefon Diggs to use him as a situational player. He's going to be a big part of this offense. Is he a 1B to Nico Collins 1A? Sure, maybe. But to your point, I think that they will try to get him some of those cheap bubble screens, those quick slants, those kind of things, try to get him in space. And so ultimately, I think that being in a dome, being in a better division, and probably having easier routes to run because there'll be defensive attention on Nico Collins and Tank Dell, and just, if you're a defensive coordinator facing the Texans now, it is pick your poison. Somebody's going to be in single coverage. Yep. One of those guys is going to be in single coverage, and what are you going to do there? And to your point about Joe Mixon, totally agree. Again, if I'm a defensive coordinator, again, I've thought about this for 30 seconds, right? Defensive coordinators are going to spend all offseason thinking about that. But if you're a defensive coordinator and you're okay, I'm playing the Texans this week, I got a choice. I can either load the box to try to stop Joe Mixon, and suddenly all my guys are on an island against Nico Collins, Tank Dell, and Stefon Diggs, or I can play 2 high safety. I can play way back. And you know what? I'll give up 5 yards to Joe Mixon every single time because I'm going to make them at least dink and dunk their way, as opposed to just any one of those guys, any one of those 3 guys can go over the top so easily. You've got to protect against that, especially with Stroud being as good as he is. He's going to look around and be like, that's the guy I'm going for. And so and they will be in scoring position more often, and they'll use Mixon at the goal line. I think this is actually a nice a trade for Joe Mixon's fantasy value here as well. Nico Collins, who I had as a top 10 wide receiver 24 hours ago, he has to come outside the top 10 because, again, now he's suddenly got competition in Diggs. I also wonder if they're a little bit concerned about Tank Dell's recovery. I wonder if this
serious injury, small guy, speedster.
Yeah, who was great last year in a small sample size. And so, they're like, hey, we've got a window here. We've got C.J. Stroud's rookie contract, and we've got a chance to really do something. We don't have to pay Nico Collins yet. We don't have to pay a lot of the defense yet. We've got a small window here to really make some noise. So, hey, we can take on Diggs' contract and try to protect against the fact that, remember Tony Pollard?
Yeah.
Tony Pollard broke his leg the year before, and he came back in time, but he wasn't the same guy for the first half of the season. Again, Tank Dell, smaller guy who had a similar injury. Again, like a speed guy. If you're nervous about maybe this protects against, if Tank Dell isn't 100% ready to go.
Yep.
Real quickly, the trickle effect on the Bills offense. Now, this is a difficult subject because we all know the Bills are going to draft a wide receiver
At
early.
least one.
At least one. So it's hard to actually make predictions of what does this do for who and that because we don't have the full puzzle yet in front of us. But I think the guys that are there, how do you look at them right now?
I think if I had to draft today, I feel like the safest guy, first off, let's start with Josh Allen. It's not ideal for Josh Allen. Like, regardless of whatever's happening in the locker room, losing somebody the talent of Stefon Diggs is not great. But he's still Josh Allen. I think the wide receiver room is not complete, to your point. I think they will add some guys. There's also some big-name free agents we'll talk about in a second. Maybe they trade for somebody. Do the Bills trade for Brandon Ayuk? Do the Bills trade for T. Higgins, both rumored to be on the trade block? Like, you could certainly see them not being done. I will tell you this. I would be shocked if this trade was made without Josh Allen's tacit approval. I don't think they he's the franchise. They're not. Josh Allen isn't learning about this by a tweet from the NFL Network or Schefter, right? Like he's. So my expectation is that there's probably more to it than just football as to why this trade goes down, and they're not done yet. But Josh Allen, because of the rushing, because of the touchdowns, Josh Allen's still gonna be my number one quarterback in fantasy. But with Stefon Diggs and now Gabe Davis gone, Connor, what kind of wide receiver do you think the Bills are definitely drafting one in the first round, and I think there's a chance they take one in round 2 as well. But like now we sort of thought like it's definitely going to be somebody on that side. Is it like absolute? There's no way they're doing a slot guy because now all they've got Shakur and
Right.
Curtis Samuel, blah blah blah. So
yeah, it's a big outside vertical receiver. And if you go way up into this draft, which is not going to be easy to do from the 28th pick, you're looking at Rome Odunze, you're looking at Brian Thomas Jr. If you're stuck at 28, you're in the world of Adonai Mitchell from Texas and Keon Coleman from Florida State. I don't think the Bills are going to be looking at the Ladd McConkeys of the world as much as he can play inside and outside. I think they need somebody, Jay, where, this is the highlight right now, but they also lost Gabe Davis. So the presence to win down the field right now, especially with size, feels like it's lacking in this offense.
Yeah, I think Khalil Shakir is the interesting one because he had an excellent close to last season. I've always enjoyed Khalil Shakir's work. He's just a very good player. Also, Connor, I think your Jets now have the best roster in the AFC East.
On paper.
Yeah,
it's all about keeping the old men healthy.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of old dudes on paper
They
with
might
that
win the
team.
division.
don't the Dolphins still on paper.
They lost some guys, though.
They did lose some guys.
It'd be wide open. I guarantee those. Set the odds for me.
They're
right
plus 200 to win the division. The Bills are plus 160. The Dolphins are plus 200 as well.
So almost
So
even
it's
across the board?
Pretty even. Patriots won't win the division, but those top three, pretty close.
Just to put a bow here on the Bills, yes, your point. Like this wide receiver room isn't done yet. Could they? Whether it's like Higgins and Ayuk, could they sign OBJ, who's a free agent? Tyler Boyd, like your guy Michael Thomas is out there. Wow. Some DJ Shark, anyway, they're not done tinkering yet. But if I had to draft today, I feel like the safest guy is probably Dalton Kincaid.
For sure.
Because they're not going to trade another tight end, and he came on towards the second half of last year. So it'll be interesting to see Shakir versus Curtis Samuel.
Yeah.
I think Curtis Samuel was a really nice signing by them. He's a very talented player who's now going to see a big lift in target share. So I like Curtis Samuel, but they're going to be a more balanced offense, between run and pass, and they may just sort of Shakir and Samuel may just sort of balance each other out, and so one week it's one guy and the next week it's the next. I do feel like Dalton Kincaid is a guy who's going to have a very solid role at a position that doesn't have a ton of depth in terms of fantasy football. So he's the guy I feel best about on the Bills as it stands today.
Yep, agreed.
Hey, it's Matthew Berry from NBCSports.com and RotoWorld.com, and I want to thank you so much for watching whatever it is you just watched, or if nothing else, being too lazy to click out of the autoplay after this video started, after whatever it is you actually wanted to watch finished. But now that you're here, I'd like to take a moment here to ask you respectfully now, okay? I'm asking you respectfully to subscribe to the NFL on NBC YouTube channel. You'll get the latest Roto World fantasy news headlines, all sorts of great shows, including my own Fantasy Football Happy Hour. So go subscribe now. Again, I'm asking
respectfully.